I had just finished a late shift at the mill and was eager to get home, but the mountain road I usually took had been calling me in that half-familiar, half-dreadful way I'd grown accustomed to. It was narrow and winding, the kind of road that hugs the ridge so close you can see the drop-offs if you dare glance to the side. Normally, I'd make the drive in about 20 minutes, but that night something felt off the moment I pulled onto the asphalt. The air was thick, damp, and a fog had rolled in faster than I'd expected. My headlights cut through it just enough to make the edges of the road visible, but beyond that, everything was swallowed by a gray, wet silence. As I eased my car around a sharp curve, I heard it for the first time, a horn. It was low, mournful, almost like the whistle of a train, except there were no tracks anywhere nearby. I slowed, my foot hovering over the brake, thinking maybe it was some truck coming up behind me. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror, nothing moved in the fog. I pressed on, telling myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the thick air and the way the mountains play with sound. But the horn came again, closer this time, echoing off the pines and rocks, the note lingering long enough to set my teeth on edge. I tried to shake it off, to convince myself it was just a logging truck or some local driver making their way home late. My hands gripped the wheel tight, knuckles white, and I kept checking the mirrors. Every time I looked, I thought I saw headlights just beyond the mist, a dull glow bobbing like a fire caught in the fog. But whenever I tried to focus, it was gone, as though whatever it was didn't want to be seen. My stomach churned with the kind of dread that comes from knowing something is watching you, something that doesn't belong where it's seen. The curves of the ridge seemed sharper than usual, the black drops on either side deeper. I tried to remember the last time I'd driven this section and felt a flicker of unease. Something was following, or maybe I was being led, I couldn't tell which. And then I saw them, tracks in the wet asphalt, deep and wide, the kind that couldn't belong to a car. I slowed to inspect them. Each groove was dark and greasy with rainwater, disappearing and reappearing around bends, following the line of my tires exactly. My pulse jumped, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. I wanted to turn back, but an instinct buried somewhere deep in my gut screamed that stopping would be worse. The horn came again, sharp this time, and I swear it came from all around me. I pressed my foot harder to the pedal, the tires skimming over the wet road, hugging the curves as tight as I dared. The fog was denser now, clinging to the car like a living thing, and I caught glimpses of shapes moving through it, shapes just on the edge of vision, too quick and fleeting to identify. My headlights didn't reach them. They didn't need to. The sound of the horn seemed to come from those shadows, reverberating through the trees, through the wet rocks, through me. I remembered the old stories the locals used to whisper about that road. Faint warnings about travelers who'd gone out at night and never returned, or who came back changed, shaken in ways no one could explain. I always laughed them off, thinking of them as the kind of tales old folks tell to keep young drivers in line. But that night laughing was impossible. Every sense was tuned to the sound, to the fog, to the invisible pressure on my back. The tracks never left me. Deep grooves, wider than a car, following my every turn. I could feel them beneath my tires, echoing the rhythm of the horn. The feeling of being followed became almost tangible, a weight pressing into the seat and steering wheel, an oppressive reminder that whatever this was, it wasn't human. The fog grew thicker still, rolling across the asphalt like waves, swallowing the road ahead. I wanted to turn around, to drive backward and escape, but the curves made it impossible. I had to go forward. At some point I thought I saw lights again, but this time they weren't just in the rear view. They were ahead, faint, glowing between the fog and the trees, like a gas station or a house. Relief washed over me, thin and fleeting. I didn't dare slow down until I was sure I could make it. The sound of the horn faded with each turn, though not entirely, lingering like the memory of a scream at the edge of hearing. I emerged from the fog finally, the warm lights of a lonely station spilling across the pavement. I pulled in hard, brakes squealing, and glanced back. There were no tracks, no shadows, nothing behind me. The road was empty, the fog retreating, leaving only the quiet hum of fluorescent lights and the distant whistle of wind. I sat there for a long time, hands shaking, staring at the mirrors, waiting for something to appear, to materialize, to make itself known. But nothing did. I never learned what made that horn, or what left the tracks, or why it had chosen me that night. I've tried to tell myself it was fog playing tricks, or an old truck long abandoned, or even my own mind stretched thin from exhaustion. But every time I take that ridge road, I feel it, the weight of being followed, the whisper of the horn in the fog. Sometimes when the wind is right, I swear I hear it again, calling from nowhere, and I know, deep down, I'm not entirely alone out there, even now. Years later, I avoid driving late nights on mountain roads. I'll take the longer way, stay on well-lit highways, anything to keep from feeling that same oppressive weight, that slow, quiet dread of being followed by something that doesn't belong. And I know that if I ever ignore that instinct, I might never make it back, because whatever it was that night, it wasn't just sound or shadow. It was something patient, waiting for the right moment. And sometimes, in the dead fog of a ridge road, patience is all it needs. It was late, far later than I'd planned to be out, but work had run long and I was too tired to argue with myself about staying the night in town. I just wanted to be home. The road that wound through the hollers was familiar to me. Every curve, every lean of the trees, even the way the asphalt seemed to shimmer when the fog rolled in. It's a narrow road, no lines painted down the middle, and when you drive it at night, it feels less like a public route and more like something private, a path carved out for ghosts and the kind of people who prefer to be unseen. The radio barely caught a signal that night. Every station crackled with static or half-words of sermons, preachers warning about sinners and devils and the end of all things. I turned it off and let the quiet fill the cab. The night was thick, so dark it pressed against the windows, and the headlights reached just far enough to carve out a tunnel of pale light ahead. For a while I didn't see another soul, and I liked it that way. But somewhere between the second switchback and the ridge that drops down to the creek, I caught sight of lights in my rearview mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it. Folks around here drive late. Hunters, truckers, people heading home from shift work. The lights stayed back a good distance, steady and low. I figured whoever it was just didn't want to push through the fog too fast. But as the minutes passed, something about the way they held there, never gaining, never fading, started to pick at me. I slowed a bit, half expecting them to pass. But they didn't. I could feel it then, that little twinge in the back of the neck. The instinct that says you're being watched. I pulled into the gravel lot of an old roadside church that sat half buried in the woods. The place had been abandoned for years, but the shape of its steeple still broke the line of trees. I stopped and waited. The other car rolled in behind me. I could see its outline through the fog, a four-door, maybe gray or dark blue, older model by the looks of the headlights. The engine idled. Nobody got out. I waited for the driver to pass, to honk, to do anything, but they didn't move. Just sat there, lights burning into the back of my car. I can't explain the kind of dread that crept up on me in that moment. I tried telling myself it was just coincidence, that maybe they'd stopped for the same reason I did, to stretch, to rest, to let the fog thin out. But when I turned my lights off, theirs stayed on. When I started the car again and pulled out, they did the same. Perfect timing, perfect distance. It wasn't natural. I drove faster. The road twisted, dipping and curving, and each time I came out of a bend, I expected to see those headlights gone. But they were always there, steady, like eyes that refused to blink. I pushed past 60, then 70. The hollers blurred by, dark trees, darker sky, flashes of creek water catching the beam of my lights. Still, the car followed. There was a back road I knew, one that ran down past an old quarry and looped back around toward the highway. Nobody used it much. It was too rough, too narrow. I turned onto it, gravel spitting out from under my tires, hoping to lose them. The headlights behind me followed without hesitation. Every turn I took, they mirrored perfectly. The engine behind me roared when mine did, like an echo, or a reflection that refused to be broken. I remember the smell of the night. Wet leaves, exhaust, the faint bite of oil burning from the engine. My pulse pounded in my ears. The fog thickened again, and I could barely see beyond the reach of my lights. I took a sharp turn onto a small wooden bridge that crossed the creek. It was slick with moss, narrow, the kind of bridge you had to ease across at a crawl. I stopped right in the middle, my hands gripping the wheel so tight they ached. The headlights behind me dimmed, then flickered out. Silence. I waited, every muscle tight, staring into the rearview mirror, waiting for those lights to flare up again. They They didn't. I rolled the window down, the night air cold and heavy against my skin. The only sounds were the slow creak of the bridge and the rush of water beneath it. The air smelled like rain and earth. I looked back again, nothing. No lights, no sound of an engine. Just the empty road swallowed by fog. I don't know what made me get out of the car. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. My boots hit the boards of the bridge, the wood slick underfoot. I walked to the end and peered back down the road. There was nothing there, not a sound. No crunch of tires, no hum of an idling engine. The air felt wrong, like it was too still, too heavy. That's when I saw something, or thought I did. A shape just beyond the fog, tall and still, like someone standing at the edge of the trees. My chest tightened. I blinked, and it was gone. The fog drifted through the space where it had been, curling over the road like smoke. I stood there for maybe a minute, maybe longer, before I forced myself back into the car. I started the engine and eased off the bridge, trying to convince myself it was over. I told myself I'd imagined the whole thing, that the car had turned off somewhere behind me. But when I reached the next curve, the reflection of headlights bloomed suddenly in the rearview mirror. They weren't behind me anymore. They were already waiting ahead, parked off to the side, facing me. My stomach dropped. The road was too narrow to turn around, too slick to stop quickly. I slowed just enough to see the outline of that car through the fog, its headlights flaring white in the mist. There was someone inside, I could tell by the silhouette. The driver leaned forward, elbows on the wheel, face too shadowed to make out. I swear they were watching me. I didn't stop. I didn't look again. I drove straight past, keeping my eyes forward, trying not to notice the way the figure seemed to turn its head as I passed, following me with its gaze. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I didn't check the mirrors after that, didn't dare. I kept driving until the fog thinned and the night started to bleed into gray. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the eastern sky was starting to lighten. The world felt normal again. Crickets, the hum of early morning wind, the smell of dew on the grass. But when I got out of the car, I noticed something that stopped me cold. On the trunk, smeared through the dirt and dew, were streaks, 2 long marks, like someone had dragged their fingers across it. They started at the edge of the taillight and trailed off toward the center, uneven and faint, but definitely there. I stood there for a long time, staring at those marks, trying to find an explanation. I didn't have one. Maybe it was a trick of the fog. Maybe something brushed against it when I stopped. That's what I told myself, but deep down I didn't believe it. I didn't sleep that morning or the next. I kept replaying the drive in my head, the headlights, the way they matched every move I made. Weeks later, I drove that same route again in daylight, thinking maybe I'd find something that would make sense of it. A pull-off I hadn't noticed, tire tracks, anything. There was nothing. The road looked ordinary, quiet. The bridge where I'd stopped was the same as always, boards warped and damp, the water running below calm and clear. But when I crossed it, the engine sputtered once, just a small hiccup, and through the static of the radio came a sound so faint I thought I'd imagined it. The low rumble of an engine and, behind it, the brief flicker of a horn. I've told this story a few times over the years. Most folks think I was tired, maybe half asleep, maybe my mind playing tricks. But every now and then, when I'm driving late and catch a pair of headlights in my mirror, that feeling comes back. The dread that whoever's behind me isn't just another driver trying to get home. It's something else, something patient, something that likes to follow until the road runs out. And sometimes, when the fog is thick enough, I still see that same faint glow in the distance, waiting, matching my speed exactly. It was just past midnight when I left my brother's place, the kind of night where the world feels too quiet, like it's holding its breath. The sky was clear enough that I could see the outline of the ridge against the stars, but the air was heavy, thick with mist that hadn't yet turned to fog. I remember thinking I should have stayed the night, but home wasn't far, and I'd driven that route more times than I could count. The 2-lane road cut through the holler like a dark vein. No lights for miles, just the occasional farmhouse buried in trees. I'd driven it enough to know the bends by memory. The first hour of driving passed in silence. I didn't bother with the radio. The static out there always seemed louder than the music, like it carried its own rhythm, something that hummed beneath the noise. I kept my high beams on and my eyes on the road. It was when I crested the ridge just before Hollow Creek that I noticed something strange. The rearview mirror caught a flicker of movement, a glint that didn't match the pattern of the road lights. At first I thought it was the reflection of my dashboard, the soft green glow of the speedometer bouncing off the glass. But then it blinked. I leaned closer, squinting at the mirror. For a second there was nothing. Then, just as I started to ease back, I saw them. Two eyes, wide and still, staring from the darkness of my back seat. My first thought was that someone had somehow climbed into my car while I wasn't looking, maybe when I stopped for gas earlier. I felt a shock of adrenaline, my body cold and electric all at once. I slammed my foot on the brake, tires screeching against the asphalt, the smell of burning rubber filling the car. My heart hammered as I twisted around, ready to confront whoever it was. But the back seat was empty. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, my pulse so loud it drowned out everything else. The car idled in the middle of that empty road, steam rising from the hood in the cool air. I turned back to the mirror, half expecting to see those eyes again. There was nothing, just the dark reflection of my own face, pale and strained. I told myself it had been a trick of the light, that the moon or a distant reflector had caught me wrong. I put the car back in gear and started moving again, slower this time. But a mile or so down the road, the eyes came back. They weren't sudden this time. They seemed to fade into view like they'd been there all along and were just choosing to be seen. Two pale shapes in the rear view, unblinking, calm. They didn't look angry or wild, just patient, watching. I gripped the wheel harder, forcing myself not to look, but my gaze kept drifting back. The eyes followed. When I turned slightly, they shifted with me, staying fixed. They weren't reflections. I knew that in my gut. I muttered out loud, something like, "You're seeing things." "You're tired." But my voice sounded strange in the car, smaller than it should have been. Every instinct screamed at me to pull over, to check again. But the thought of stopping felt worse. I couldn't bear the idea of turning around and finding something sitting there, waiting. So I kept driving. The road began to dip into the holler, trees leaning over like they were closing in. The branches overhead tangled together, cutting out what little moonlight there was. My headlights caught the glint of wet leaves and gravel, the narrow yellow line in the center flickering in and out of sight. I could feel those eyes on me, not just in the mirror, but everywhere, on my neck, my shoulders, the back of my skull. It felt like a presence pressing in from behind the glass. I reached the first intersection, a crossroad that led deeper into the woods, and I slowed to a stop. The car idled, engine clicking. I looked again. The eyes were gone. Relief washed over me, so sudden it made me lightheaded. I took a deep breath, leaned back, and laughed under my breath at how scared I'd gotten. I was just tired, that's all. That's what I told myself as I pressed the gas and started moving again. But then, the headlights of my car flickered. Just once, barely noticeable, then again. The dash lights dimmed and brightened. The radio hissed softly with static, though it had been turned off. My reflection in the rear view seemed wrong. The angle didn't line up right. My own eyes looked distant, out of sync with the rest of me. And behind them, faint and almost invisible, the other pair had returned. They were closer now. I didn't think. I just hit the gas. The tires spun, throwing gravel, and the car shot forward. The road twisted down into the valley, the mist growing thicker, heavier, until the world outside became a blur of pale gray. The more I drove, the heavier the feeling became, that something was inside with me, crouched low, waiting for me to falter. Every bump in the road made me flinch. I couldn't breathe right. My throat felt tight, like the air itself had gone wrong. After what felt like hours, the road straightened, and I saw the old Hollow Creek Bridge up ahead. I remember thinking if I could just make it across, I'd be close enough to town that someone might be around. I pressed down harder on the gas. The bridge was slick with dew, the wood creaking under the tires. Halfway across, the car sputtered and the lights went out completely. The engine died. The only sound was the creak of the bridge and the creek rushing below. My breath came in shallow bursts, and the darkness inside the car felt absolute. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help it. I turned slowly toward the rear view. They were right there. Not in the mirror anymore, behind me. Close enough that I could feel the shift in air, the weight of something leaning forward. I froze. The air smelled different then. Not of the woods or the rain, but something old, dry, like a room that hadn't been opened in years. I must have blacked out for a moment, because the next thing I remember was the sound of my engine turning over again. The lights flickered back on by themselves, the dashboard glowing soft green. I was still on the bridge, but the car had rolled to the far side. The road ahead was empty. I looked in the mirror one last time. The eyes were gone. When I got home, the sky was starting to pale with dawn. I sat in the driveway for nearly 10 minutes before I could make myself get out. My legs shook so bad I could barely stand. I went straight inside, locked the door, and didn't sleep. I told myself I'd imagined it, that maybe I'd nodded off at the wheel. But the next morning, my neighbor came by asking if I'd made it home some other way. When I said I'd taken Hollow Creek Road, his face went pale. He told me that road had been closed for a week, washed out from heavy rain. The bridge was gone, collapsed into the creek days earlier. I laughed it off at first, but when I checked the local paper later, he was right. There'd been a collapse. No one had been able to cross that bridge since last Thursday. I haven't driven that way since. Still, every so often, when I'm on a long stretch of empty road, I'll catch myself glancing into the rearview mirror without meaning to. And sometimes, just for a split second, I see them again. Those same eyes, patient and still, watching from the dark. And every time I do, I can't help but wonder if I ever really made it off that bridge at all. I remember that night so clearly it feels like it's happening again every time I think about it. I was driving back home, miles from the nearest town, through those back roads that twist and climb through the hollers. The fog had rolled in earlier, thin at first, curling over the trees and sticking to the edges of the road. My old car rattled over the cracks and patches in the asphalt. It was just me, the hum of the tires, and the quiet night. I hadn't expected anything out of the ordinary. I'd driven this road a dozen times before at night in fog, and nothing had ever happened. That's when the radio turned on. At first, it was just static, low and scratchy, like the kind you hear when a signal struggles to reach the hills. I laughed, thinking some late-night DJ was playing a prank or some old station was kicking in a stray broadcast. I reached over to turn it off, but the static sharpened, and a whisper cut through it. At first, I couldn't make out the words. It was soft, barely more than a breath, but I caught it. Faraz. I froze. My hand hovered over the dial. My pulse jumped. There was no one else in the car, no one around for miles. I was the only one out here. And yet, it said my name. Not shouted, not calling from another car, but like the words were pressed into the air just for me. I tried switching stations, rolling through AM and FM, trying to find some rational explanation. Nothing. Every dial, every click, returned me to the same whisper, the same voice. It didn't stop there. It started telling me things I couldn't explain, things no one should know. "The argument with your brother tonight," it said, almost casual, like it was just passing the time. "The bottle you left in the cup holder half finished." My stomach dropped. My hands gripped the wheel so tight the knuckles turned white. My mind scrambled, trying to convince myself this was impossible. I'd driven these roads 1,000 times, never heard a word beyond the hum of the engine and the occasional owl. Then it whispered something that made me shiver so hard I almost lost control. "Your mother's old phone number," it said, almost a hiss, almost pleased. The numbers it recited were right. My breathing became ragged. I tried everything, turning the radio off completely, pulling fuses, even turning the car off and on again, but the voice returned every time. Closer, louder, urgent. It wasn't static anymore. It was inside the car, filling every hollow space, echoing against the seats and the metal in my bones. I pulled over to the shoulder, my heart hammering. The fog was thick now, and the trees leaned over the road like they were watching, pressing against the windshield. I sat there, frozen, listening as the voice paused. Then quietly at first it laughed. Not a human laugh, not a joke, but a rustling, dry, sibilant sound like leaves scraping across a bare forest floor in the wind. It seemed to move through the car, touching the air, the dash, the steering wheel, the radio, until I could feel it vibrating in my chest. I floored the accelerator. The car lurched forward, tires spitting gravel, my old engine straining like it had never strained before. But the voice didn't leave. It seemed to travel through the engine, the wind whipping past the car, over the tires, vibrating in the wheel and my seat. It whispered my name again, over and over, faster and closer this time. pressing into the cabin like an invisible passenger leaning close to my ear. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but the mist made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. I could make out the shapes of trees, shadows stretching across the road like long fingers. Every time I turned a corner, I thought I caught a flash of movement in the periphery, just a shift of light or a shadow against the fog. I didn't dare check the mirrors. I didn't want to know if something was riding behind me. The road stretched on, unbroken and endless, and I kept the pedal down, heart racing, muscles trembling. My mind tried to grasp some logic. Maybe it was the radio's wiring, some interference from the mountains, a stray signal bouncing off the hills. But the way it whispered my name, the details it recited, there was no signal strong enough for that. I was alone. It knew me. At some point I saw lights ahead. A gas station, small and flickering, barely lit. Relief washed over me, thin as it was, and I swerved toward it, tires crunching over gravel. As I pulled up, the radio went dead. Silence fell over the car like a blanket, heavy and suffocating. I sat there for a long time, listening to nothing. My hands shook, my pulse slowed only gradually, but the memory of the voice lingered like a shadow, pressing at the edges of my mind. I convinced myself it was some hallucination, a trick of exhaustion and the isolation of the backroads. The mountains and hollers play with your senses, I told myself. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe some neighbor's old ham radio had picked up my number by coincidence, but I knew deep down that wasn't it. That night wasn't coincidence, and it wasn't exhaustion. Something had known my name, known my thoughts, known the details no one could. And it had reached into the car, into the engine, into me. Even now, years later, I avoid those roads after dark. I stay on the highways where lights are bright and traffic is constant. But sometimes, late at night, when I drive past an empty stretch of road and the mist begins to curl over the asphalt, I swear I hear it again. A whisper, low and urgent, carrying my name. And even when the radio is off, even when the road is empty, the memory of it makes my hands tighten on the wheel. My pulse spike, and the hollows feel impossibly deep and close. I never went back to that stretch of road after that night. And I know I never will. There's something out there, waiting, patient and silent, that knows things no one should. And though I've convinced myself it was a hallucination, a trick of the hills, I know the truth. Somewhere out there, in the dark hollers, the mountains, and the back roads, it's still listening, still waiting, still whispering my name. I remember that stretch of the old highway better than any part of my own neighborhood, and not because it's easy to navigate. It's the section where the trees grow wrong, twisted limbs, jagged boughs, gnarled roots spilling over the edges of the asphalt. The soil there always smells damp and bitter, like earth that hasn't fully forgiven the rain. The first time I drove through, I felt uneasy, but I chalked it up to the isolation. There's hardly ever anyone on that road, and at night it feels like it's been abandoned for decades, even though maps and locals insist it's still in use. That night, I was heading home from a late visit with a friend, the air thick with humidity, low clouds pressing close to the holler. My headlights cut a thin swath of visibility through the trees, the rest swallowed by darkness so complete it felt like it had weight. I remember noticing first that the lights were dimming, not gradually, but like someone was reaching into the beam and squeezing the brightness out. At first I thought my battery had gone, or maybe a loose wire. I slowed, foot on the brake, heart sinking, and checked the gauges. The engine purred fine, everything else seemed normal. And yet the light, it was fading. Then it hit me. The darkness wasn't just absence of light. It was moving. Shadows shifted and stretched across the road, not in the way that headlights always make shadows dance, but independently, as if the night itself had taken shape. The edges of my vision were filled with it, leaning toward me, climbing out of the holler, pooling across the asphalt. I slammed my hands onto the wheel, trying to focus on the strip of road I could see, but it seemed to lean in from the sides, pressing against the metal of my car, making the doors feel heavier than they should. Like the blackness was reaching for me, I pressed the accelerator. Tires screamed over the cracks and potholes, kicking gravel and leaves in all directions. But the darkness followed. It crept along the road like a living thing, crawling over the asphalt and stretching like tendrils to meet the car. Every instinct I had screamed at me to stop, to turn, to run, but moving fast only seemed to anger it, make it cling harder, press closer. My headlights dimmed further with every second, my own reflection in the side mirrors barely visible through the black that enveloped them. The sound was the worst. Not a voice, not a growl, but a low pressure, a subtle hum that vibrated through the floorboards and seats. It was like the air itself had density, like every molecule had thickened and was leaning into me, keeping me pinned behind the wheel. I couldn't see the trees anymore, just a suffocating blackness pressing from both sides, crawling, sliding, and waiting. The road no longer felt like a line of asphalt, but a tunnel being swallowed from the edges inward. I remember gripping the wheel so tight my fingers ached, knuckles white in the dim light. Every muscle in my body trembled. My mind was a jumble of disbelief and terror. I tried calling out to scream, but my voice stuck in my throat. I thought of turning around, but even imagining the headlights of an approaching car seemed impossible. They'd be swallowed before they ever reached me. Somewhere in that stretch, I caught glimpses, tiny flickers at the corners of my eyes, shapes moving, sliding. Sometimes just a flicker of gray that vanished the moment I tried to focus. I felt it crawling closer with every bend, every rise in the road. I gunned the engine harder, praying for the turn that would lead me out, any break in the suffocating corridor. My tires spun over gravel, over moss, over small stones that bounced against the undercarriage. And yet the blackness followed, relentless, patient, hungry. It felt like hours. The road twisted, dropped, rose, all under a canopy that seemed thicker than the sky above, pressing down, enclosing me in a space that had no top or bottom, just darkness and weight. My headlights fought against it, and for a moment I thought they'd fail completely, vanish into the mass pressing against me. My chest ached from holding my breath, from the pressure in my shoulders and spine, from the terror crawling inside me. Then finally there was a break. A curve, a rise, and suddenly the headlights cut through like normal. The night returned to its usual state, trees standing tall, shadows falling naturally, the road visible and empty. I blinked, disbelieving, expecting the darkness to surge back at any moment, but it didn't. I was alone again. The air was lighter. The world was ordinary. I remember gripping the wheel for a long time after, too shaken to drive. My hands shook, my knees trembled, and I couldn't stop staring at the road, expecting the darkness to return, to reach for me from the edges. When I finally reached home, I parked in the driveway and sat there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for something to appear in the shadows, for some echo of what I had just driven through. Nothing did. For weeks afterward, even in daylight, I felt the memory pressing against me. Driving past a patch of shade, a culvert, a tree line, the sensation returned, the heavy, patient weight, the slow crawl of darkness at the edges of vision. It wasn't just a trick of memory or nerves. I could feel it like a presence, a lingering pressure, as if the hollow had followed me out, leaving a mark on the road of my mind. Every time I drove even familiar backroads, that part of me stayed alert, waiting for the shadows to reassemble, to stretch again, to lean over the edges of reality. I've told people about it before. They laughed or shook their heads. It's just an old highway, they say. Just tired eyes, imagination, fog, and night playing tricks. But I know better. That hollow isn't just a place. It's alive in its own way. Patient, hungry, waiting to reclaim what passes through it. And I know that if I ever drive that section again after dark, it will find me. I don't know how or why, but I feel it in the corners of my vision, in the space between headlights and shadow. And I know that no matter how far I drive, that stretch of highway has claimed a piece of me, a piece of my sense of safety, a shadow that follows whenever the night presses in, even now, on roads I know well. In the comfort of city lights or street lamps, the memory returns, a patch of darkness too thick, a shadow lingering just past a turn, and the feeling of being swallowed, of the road drinking the light, comes back. It is patient, it is still hungry, and I can't ever quite shake it. I remember that night like it was carved into my memory with some slow, deliberate hand. I was driving home along the mountain pass I'd known since I was a kid, the road winding tight around ridges and hollers, the kind of place where the guardrails are barely more than a suggestion and every curve could hide a washed-out cliff or a tree fallen across the asphalt. The sky had been clear when I left town, a half moon hanging over the ridges, and the forecast had promised nothing but a cool, calm night. But the fog rolled in faster than any forecast could have warned, slinking over the peaks and spilling into the holler like a living thing. Within minutes, it had swallowed everything: the road lines, the trees, the guardrails, and the headlights barely cut through more than a few feet. I slowed, footlight on the brake, trying to keep my bearings. But the fog wasn't just thick, it was insistent. It moved around me in curls and eddies, shifting like smoke or water, and every time I thought I had a clear view ahead, it would bend in a new way, obscuring what I thought I'd just passed. The further I drove, the heavier it felt, pressing in through the windshield and around the doors, the weight of it settling like a damp blanket over everything. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles pale, my pulse pounding, heart thudding in a rhythm that matched the tires rolling over the uneven asphalt. Then I saw them. At first they were just shadows at the corners of my vision, small shapes that vanished when I looked directly. But over the next few minutes they became clearer, figures standing just at the edge of visibility, watching. Sometimes they waved, sometimes they pointed, sometimes they just stood. Their faces were obscured by the fog, features blurred, but the posture, the insistence of their stance, felt deliberate. They weren't random. They were waiting, guiding, or maybe warning. I tried to convince myself it was the play of headlights, the fog shifting oddly over the road, but my instincts screamed otherwise. I drove on, careful and slow, yet somehow, no matter how many bends I rounded, I ended up back where I had started, or so it felt. Every turn brought me to the same sharp curve near the ridge, the same fallen tree at the edge, the same hollowed-out roots spilling across the shoulder. Panic began to gnaw at me. My breathing grew shallow. The fog seemed to whisper then, soft and sibilant, words I couldn't make out, instructions I could almost understand. It moved in sync with me, curling around the car, pressing, guiding. I thought I knew this road. I didn't. I was lost in a place I'd known all my life, spun around like a leaf in some invisible current. Every time I tried to focus, to find a landmark or a break in the fog, it shifted. The figures flickered in and out at the edges of my vision, leading me deeper into the hollow. I remember thinking I could reach out and touch them, but I knew I shouldn't. Every instinct I had told me to keep moving, to stay calm, to not panic, but it was impossible. The fog wasn't neutral. It had a rhythm, a pulse, a deliberate way of moving. I realized then that I wasn't driving through the fog. The fog was driving me. I tried counting curves, trying to keep track of distance, but nothing matched. The road twisted and looped back on itself in impossible ways. Trees that I remembered being on the right now appeared on the left. The dips and rises I thought I knew shifted subtly. The whispering grew louder, a low hiss brushing my ears, words almost audible, syllables teasing recognition. I tried to ignore it, tried to stick to the road I knew, but the car seemed to respond to the fog more than I did, rolling over hidden dips and rises as if some unseen hand were guiding it. At one point, I stopped. I killed the engine, my hands still on the wheel, the fog curling against the windshield, pressing cold and damp into the gaps. I could hear nothing but the gentle hiss of mist, the soft slap of dew hitting the hood, and that whispering voice, faint but unmistakable. I rolled down the window, the air sharp in my face, carrying a smell of wet moss and rot, the sort of smell that makes the back of your throat tighten. I stepped out, and the fog enveloped me completely, swallowing my body and leaving only the sound of my boots against asphalt and gravel. The figures were closer now, just beyond reach, or perhaps closer than I could understand. I couldn't tell if they were moving toward me or if I had simply been pulled toward them. I climbed back in and drove, letting instinct guide me, following the curves the fog dictated. Every so often I caught a fleeting glimpse of the ridge, a familiar bend, a shadow of the tree that leaned over the shoulder. But as soon as I thought I recognized it, the landscape shifted. The holler seemed infinite, looping endlessly, twisting into itself. I felt the hollow pressing in from all sides, the fog thickening, the whispers growing. My pulse raced. I clenched the wheel, knuckles burning. It was a rhythm, a chant, a direction I didn't want to follow but had no choice but to obey. Then, as the sky began to lighten, the fog thinned. I noticed the first pale hints of dawn pushing through the mist, and for a moment, everything seemed ordinary again. The road lay in front of me clearly, the curves as I remembered them, the guardrails straight and true, the trees standing where they should. The whispering had faded, leaving only the memory, a residue in my mind like smoke clinging to a room. I exhaled, relief so sharp it made me dizzy, and pressed forward, racing the final stretch out of the hollow. I don't know how long I'd been driving in that fog, or how many times I'd circled the same bends, but I know that when I finally reached clear air, the normal world felt fragile, unreal almost, like a mask over something darker. The holler had let me go, but the memory stayed, gnawing. Every patch of fog since, every dark corner of a back road, brings back that feeling, the weight, the whispers, the impossible loop of the road guiding you where it wants. And I know if I ever go back alone, I will be guided again, deeper and deeper into that hollow, until the fog swallows me completely, and the figures at the edges of vision finally close in. Even now, years later, I avoid foggy nights on back roads. I drive only where lights reach and people are around. But sometimes, just sometimes, when the air is thick and the mist curls across the asphalt, I hear it again. The faint sibilant whisper, soft but deliberate, guiding me with patient insistence. And every time I feel the hollow pressing in, waiting, patient, as if it has all the time in the world to lead me somewhere I don't want to go but can't escape. I remember that night better than most, though I wish I could forget it. I was driving home along the state route, one of those stretches that wind and bend through the hollers, dark except for the ribbons of yellow line cut by my headlights. It was late, maybe 10, maybe 11. I'd been on the road for hours, hauling through the curves, listening to the low hum of the tires against the asphalt and the occasional rustle of leaves brushing the edges of the guardrails. The world was quiet except for the car, and for a moment that quiet was a relief, a lull that made the road feel familiar and safe. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a large truck, one of those old oversized rigs that always seem to appear on these roads when you least expect them. But there was something wrong immediately. It appeared in my rear view, impossibly close, headlights bright and steady, but the angle was off somehow, as if it were riding along the lane beside me, even when I swerved. Bigger than any truck I'd ever seen, wider and taller, and it seemed to hum, a low vibration that made the car tremble slightly under my hands. I eased back on the accelerator, thinking it would pass, thinking it would slow behind me. It didn't. It stayed there, patient, unyielding, following every curve I took, every rise and dip, riding too close for comfort, too deliberate to be coincidence. I passed it on a straight stretch, hugging the yellow line, heart hammering, expecting it to pass or fade behind me, but it didn't. The rear view told the same story. There it was, unwavering, its lights flickering in a strange rhythm, almost deliberate, like it was aware I was looking, aware I was frightened. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the reflection of moonlight on the mirrors, maybe a trick of the headlights, but it didn't fit. None of it fit. The truck followed, silent in the way trucks don't, engine quiet except for that low vibrating hum that thrummed through my chest. I pulled into the first gas station I saw, heart in my throat. I killed the engine and stepped out, pretending to be casual, trying to catch a glimpse of the driver, to see if this was some prank, some trucker who had followed me through the curves just for amusement. But there was nothing. No truck in the lot, no lights reflecting off metal, just the quiet hum of the pumps and the distant croak of frogs in the creek nearby. I laughed shakily, telling myself I'd imagined it. Maybe a trick of fatigue, a long stretch of road, a tired mind conjuring something it had always feared. I filled the tank, wiped sweat from my hands, and waited a few minutes, watching the station's lights flicker in the darkness. The highway outside was empty. Safe, I thought. I would drive the remaining stretch home and leave this behind. I got back in the car, the door thumping shut, and started rolling down the highway again. It was waiting. I saw it before I had time to react. The same truck, impossibly close, sitting at the next bend like it had been there the entire time, as if it had never left. The headlights were bright again, flickering in that same unnerving rhythm, and the low hum thrummed through the air. There was no driver, no silhouette, no movement behind the wheel, just that immense, impossible shape, following with patience and precision. My pulse hit my throat. I considered stopping, turning around, or pulling off into some side road, but every instinct told me not to. It wasn't aggressive, not in a conventional sense, but there was a weight to its presence, a quiet insistence that made me feel trapped in the narrow corridor of the highway. I tried to lose it. I weaved through the curves, pressed the accelerator, hugged the bends, but no matter what I did, it mirrored me, keeping pace without effort, engine silent but somehow aware of me, of my movements, my panic. I could feel the vibration through the tires, through the metal of the doors, like the truck was alive, aware, waiting. And the lights, they flickered at intervals that made me doubt my eyes. Almost a pulse, almost a signal, like it was studying me, judging me, understanding every move I made. I remember taking a long straightaway, trying to time a pass, but when I looked in the mirror, it wasn't behind me anymore. My stomach sank. Relief? No, something worse. I was unprepared, and for one terrifying moment I thought it had vanished, maybe left me alone. I slowed to glance over my shoulder. Nothing. Empty highway. Trees leaning over the asphalt, pale in the headlights, wind rustling the leaves. My hands shook. The highway seemed quiet. Safe. I eased back onto the road, only for the next curve to reveal it again. There it was, sitting at the bend as though it had been waiting, lights steady, enormous, driverless, patient. I couldn't comprehend it. The highway should have put distance between us. The gas station should have broken the trail. And yet here it was, patient, silent, immense, following, watching. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. I couldn't tell anymore. Every curve, every bend, every rise in the road brought the same sight. The truck, immovable and silent, its lights flickering with impossible precision, echoing in my mind long after my eyes had looked away. I don't know how long it followed me, just patient and patient, engineless but alive in some way I couldn't understand. My focus narrowed to survival, to the next bend, the next turn, trying to keep the truck behind me, though every part of me knew that wasn't going to happen. Finally, I pulled into my driveway, hands white on the wheel, heart racing, sweat cold against my skin. I killed the engine. The truck was gone. Nothing in the rear view except the faint reflection of the house behind me, the familiar glow of the porch light. I sat there for a long time, listening to my own breath, waiting for the vibration, the flicker, the impossible presence. Nothing came. I told myself it was over. I had made it. I was safe. Even now, the shadow of that truck lingers in my mind every time I take the long route home. Every dark stretch of highway, every reflective patch of mirror, every curve in the road brings it back. The impossible size, the silent engine, the flickering lights, the patient driverless stare. I never know when it might appear again, and I have no explanation, no memory of other drivers, no evidence, only the memory, and the certainty that somewhere on those back roads the truck still waits.